The Breath in the Snow. Part 1. Kate was halfway up the mountain trail when the air turned sharp, biting her lungs with every step. She'd hiked alone before, craved the silence of the snow, but today felt off. The wind carried a faint crunch. Behind her, heavy, deliberate, not her boots. She stopped, breath fogging in the cold, and listened. Nothing but the hiss of snow settling. Then it came again, crunch, crunch, closer, in rhythm with her paws. She spun around the empty trail. Just white drifts and jagged rocks. Her stomach tightened. She walked faster, boots sinking into the powder, the crunch echoing now louder, nearer, matching her pace like a shadow she couldn't see. The smell hit next, wet, rancid, like rotting fur carried on the breeze. Kate's throat burned, her eyes watering as she scanned the ridge, nothing but snow and stone. The crunch turned to a thud, slow, steady behind her, to close. She broke into a run, heart pounding, the sound chasing thud, hot breath brushing her neck, damp and sour. She darted behind a boulder, crouching low, her chest heaving. Silence, then a low huff, deep and guttural, inches away. She peeked out, a shape loomed through the haze, tall, hunched, its outline blurred by falling snow, yellow eyes glinting, locked on her. Kate held her breath, the cold searing her lungs, the huff louder, ragged, hungry, circling the boulder. Her hands shook as she gripped the rock, snow crunching under, something heavy to heavy, moving slow, deliberate. The smell thickened, gagging, choking, clinging to her jacket, her skin. She bolted again, legs burning, the thudding steps pounding behind, faster, closer, the breath hot, wet, grazing her ear. Ahead, a crack in the cliff, a shallow cave she dove in, slamming against the damp stone, the stench overwhelming, rot, musk, decay. The floor was littered with bones, small, brittle, animals scattered like a warning. She pressed against the wall, the cave swallowing her gasps, the thudding stopping outside. Her flashlight flickered dim, useless, casting jagged shadows. A silhouette filled the entrance, massive, hunched, its breath steaming in the cold, eyes glinting like wet glass. Kate's pulse roared, her body trembling. The figure didn't move, just stood, huffing, slow, deep, watching. The air grew heavier, the smell sinking into her, rotting, alive, its gaze pinning her like prey. She shifted, bones snapping under. Her boots cracked, the figure twitched, head tilting, breath quickening, harsh, eager. Minutes dragged, hours. Maybe the figure lingered, its eyes never blinking, its huffing a rhythm that drilled into her skull. Kate's legs cramped, her fingers numb, the cave felt tighter, the walls slick, pulsing faintly with the cold. The silhouette shifted, slow, deliberate, stepping closer, its breath fogging the entrance, hot and sour. She stifled a sob, the smell choking her wet fur, rot, death clinging to her throat, her lungs. The figure stopped, hovered, its eyes glinting brighter, cutting through the dark, staring through her, into her. The thudding resumed, slow, circling outside the cave, the snow crunching under its weight. Kate's flashlight dyed blackness, the huffing louder, closer, brushing the stone. She fumbled for her phone, signal gone, snapped a photo. The flash caught nothing but snow, yet the screen showed a blur, tall, dark, too close, eyes glowing, fixed on her. Her chest seized, the figure huffed again, deep and low, the sound vibrating through the rock, her bones, her fear. The cave wasn't safe, it was a trap, a mouth, its walls slick, its air thick, its stench alive. The night crept on, the thudding, relentless, circling, stalking, the breath hot, wet, constant. Kate's eyes stung, her hands shaking, the figure lingered, its eyes glinting through the dark, its huffing a promise, slow, steady, waiting. She clutched her knees, the bones beneath her crunching, snap, the sound echoing, drawing it closer. The silhouette filled the entrance again, taller, broader, its breath steaming, its gaze unyielding, cutting through her like a blade. The smell was unbearable, rotting, choking, sinking deeper, threading through her skin, her mind, her panic. The cold deepened, the cave trembling faintly, the huffing sharper, hungrier, the figure's eyes glinting brighter, pinning her in place. Kate's breath fogged, slow, shallow, mixing with its steam, the air too thick to swallow. The thudding circled tighter, closer, the snow crunching louder, the smell gagging her, wet, rancid, alive. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. The cave held her, the figure watched her, its breath a rhythm she couldn't escape, hot, sour, endless. The night wasn't hers, it belonged to the thing outside, to the stench, to the eyes, and she was its captive, trapped in a cave that reeked of death, a gaze she couldn't shake. Part 2. Kate's lungs burned. The cave a coffin of ice and rot that pressed against her ribs, its walls slick with a dampness that clung like sweat. The figure loomed at the entrance tall, hunched, its breath steaming in the dark, hot, sour, relentless yellow eyes glinting through the snow, pinning her where she crouched. The thudding circled slow, heavy crunching the snow outside, a rhythm that drilled into her skull, her bones, her fear. The smell was alive, wet fur, decay, death gagging her, sinking into her jacket, her skin, her throat. Bones crunched under her boots snap, small, brittle, scattered across the floor, their edges sharp against her trembling hands. This wasn't a cave, it was a den, a lair, and she'd stumbled into its jaws. The huffing grew sharper, hungry. Jagged, its steam fogging the air, brushing the stone inches from her face. Kate's flashlight was dead, her phone useless, the screen still glowed with that photo, a blur, tall and dark, eyes like wet glass staring back, too close. She pressed against the wall, its cold seeping through her slick, pulsing faintly, the thudding louder, tighter, circling the entrance. The figure shifted, its silhouette broader, heavier, its breath quickening, a low growl threading through the huff, deep, guttural, alive. Her chest seized, her hands shaking, the smell thickened, choking her, rotting in her lungs, her mind. The night dragged on, the cold biting deeper, the cave trembling with every thud, crunch outside, relentless, stalking. Kate's breath fogged shallow, ragged, mixing with its steam, the air too thick to swallow. The figure's eyes glinted brighter, cutting through the dark, unblinking, watching her every twitch, every gasp. She shifted, bones snapped, cracked, the sound echoing, drawing it closer, its head tilting, its huffing sharper, eager. The silhouette filled the entrance, massive, hunched, its breath steaming hotter, wetter, brushing her face through the gap. She stifled a sob, the smell unbearable, wet, rancid, alive, clinging to her, threading through her panic. The thudding stopped sudden, deafening silence, her ears ringing, the cave holding its breath. Kate's pulse roared, her eyes locked on the entrance, the figure gone, its eyes vanished, the steam fading. She waited seconds, minutes, her legs cramping, her fingers numb. The smell lingered, rotting, choking, sinking deeper, a weight she couldn't shake. She edged forward, peering out. Snow fell slow, the trail empty, the thudding gone. Her chest loosened, she crawled out, boots crunching on fresh powder, the cold biting her face. The den reeked behind her, decay, musk, death, but the air outside was sharper, cleaner, promising escape. Kate stumbled down the trail, legs trembling, the wind cutting through her. No crunch, no huff, just silence. Her breath fogged fast, shallow, the smell clinging to her jacket, her hair, her skin. She glanced back, the cave a black maw, empty, watching. She ran downhill, toward the lights of a small settlement nestled below huts, smoke curling from chimneys, safety. The trail steepened, her boots slipping, crunch. She froze, heart pounding, no, just her steps, just snow. She pushed on, the lights closer, the air colder, her chest aching from the run, the fear, the smell. The settlement loomed, wooden shacks, dim windows, her fists pounded on the nearest door. It creaked open, an old woman, face lined and pale, eyes wide, staring at her, through her. You've seen it, she rasped, voice low, trembling, grabbing Kate's arm, nails digging in. Kate yanked back, what? But the woman's gaze darted past her, to the ridge. Footsteps shuffled, more faces at the windows, hollow, gaunt, watching her, not the dark. The demon, the woman hissed, pulling her inside, others crowding close, their breath sour, their eyes glinting like his. The room was dim, candles flickered, shadows stretched, people pressed in, muttering. It followed her, it's here. Kate's stomach twisted, what followed me? But the woman's grip tightened, her voice sharp, the one that hunts, yellow eyes, hot breath, demon of the snow. The others nodded slow, deliberate, their faces blank, their hands cold, grabbing her, holding her. It wants you. A man growled, his breath stale, his eyes unblinking, pushing her toward the door. Kate shoved back, let me go. But they dragged her, their grip iron, their voices rising, victim, victim, it demands a victim. The door swung open, cold rushed in, the ridge loomed dark, the wind howling, crunch, the thudding returned, slow, heavy, closer. Kate's eyes stung, the smell hit, wet fur, rot, death flooding the air, gagging her. The figure stood atop the ridge, tall, hunched, its eyes glinting yellow, its breath steaming, its gaze locked on her. The people chanted, demon, demon, pushing her forward, their hands trembling, their faces pale, offering her, sacrificing her. She screamed no, twisting free, stumbling back, the thudding louder, the huffing sharper, hot, wet closing in. The night thickened, the settlement a trap, the people's eyes glinted like its, their voices a drone. Victim, victim, the figure descending, its breath steaming, its crunching steps shaking the snow. Kate's chest burned, the smell alive, rotting, choking, sinking deeper, threading through her fear, her panic, herself. The cave wasn't the lair, this was humans, prey, hunters, all one, all watching, its eyes glinting, its huffing a rhythm she couldn't escape, hot, sour, endless. The snow wasn't hers, it belonged to the thing, to the people, to the hunt, and she was its captive, trapped in a settlement that reeked of death, a gaze she couldn't shake. Part 3. Kate's boots sank into the snow outside the settlement, her breath fogging in ragged bursts as the villagers' hands clawed at her, cold, bony, relentless, dragging her toward the ridge where the figure loomed. The air reeked wet fur, rot, death gagging her, sinking into her lungs, her skin, her fear. The thudding echoed, crunch, crunch, slow, heavy, shaking the ground, the figure's yellow eyes glinting through the dark, its breath steaming hot and sour, cutting through the wind. The old woman's voice rasped, victim, victim, her nails digging into Kate's arm, her face pale and hollow, eyes glinting like it's watching, waiting, offering. The crowd pressed closer, gaunt, trembling, their chant a drone, demon, demon, their hands pushing her forward, their breath stale, their grip iron. She twisted, kicked, her scream swallowed by the wind, let me go. But they shoved harder, their faces blank, their eyes unblinking, staring through her, past her, to the ridge. The figure descended, tall, hunched, its silhouette broader, heavier, its huffing sharper, hungrier, hot, wet, brushing the air, closing in. Kate's chest burned, her legs buckled, the smell alive, rotting, choking, threading through her panic, herself. The snow crunched louder, thud, thud, the figure's steps shaking her bones, its eyes glinting brighter yellow, wet, alive, pinning her where she stood, prey in a trap she couldn't see. The villagers' hands tightened, dragging her across the snow, her boots slipping, her jacket tearing, their chant rising, victim, victim, their voices a roar, their eyes glinting like his, yellow, hollow, endless. Kate clawed at the ground, fingers numb, the cold searing her, the smell gagging her, wet, rancid, death clinging to her throat, her mind. The figure loomed closer, its breath steaming thicker, hot, sour, flooding the air, brushing her face. She glimpsed it, matted fur, hunched shoulders, eyes like lanterns watching, waiting, its huffing a rhythm that drilled into her skull, her fear, her soul. The settlement was a cage, wooden shacks trembling in the wind, their windows dark, their doors shut, silent witnesses to the hunt. Kate's hands shook, her breath fogged, mixing with its steam, the air too thick to swallow. The old woman hissed, it demands you, her grip tightening, her voice trembling, the crowd surging, pushing her toward the ridge, toward the figure, its thudding louder, crunch, crunch, its breath hotter, wetter, grazing her neck. Kate's scream broke sharp, desperate, but the wind swallowed it, the villagers' chant drowning it, demon, demon, their hands relentless, their eyes glinting, offering her, sacrificing her. She stumbled, fell, the snow biting her palms, the figure towering now, its silhouette massive, its huffing jagged, deep, guttural, alive, its eyes glinting brighter, cutting through her. Kate scrambled back, her chest heaving, the villagers circling, closing in, their faces pale, their hands cold, grabbing her, lifting her, victim, victim, their voices a storm, their eyes unblinking, staring at her, through her, to it. The smell thickened, rotting, choking, sinking deeper, threading through her lungs, her panic, herself. The figure's breath steamed hot, wet, brushing her face, her hair, its eyes locked on her, its thudding shaking the ground, crunch, crunch, closer, always closer. Kate twisted free, bolted, the snow dragging at her boots, the wind howling, the villagers lunging, demon, demon, their hands clawing, their voices roaring, chasing her. She darted between shacks, her breath ragged, the thudding behind, crunch, crunch, the figures huffing louder, hot, sour, grazing her ear. Ahead a shed, door ajar, she dove inside, slamming it shut, wood splintering, the air thick with dust, the smell flooding in wet fur, rot, death gagging her, sinking into her. The thudding stopped, silence, her pulse roaring, her hands trembling, pressing against the door, holding it shut. The shed trembled faintly, the wind howling outside, the villagers' chant fading, victim, victim, their voices distant, their footsteps crunching away. Kate's chest seized, her breath fogging, the smell alive, rotting, choking, clinging to her jacket, her skin, her fear. She peered through a crack, darkness, the ridge empty, the figure gone, its eyes vanished, its steam fading. Her hands shook, the shed creaked, the air colder, heavier, something shifted behind her, a huff low, guttural hot breath brushing her neck. She spun, nothing, the shed empty, but the smell thickened, wet, rancid, sinking deeper. Threading through her mind, the night stretched on the shed a trap, the thudding returned crunch. Crunch outside, circling the huffing sharper hot, wet brushing the walls, the door, her skin. Kate's eyes stung, her breath fogged, mixing with its steam the air too thick to breathe. The villagers' chant echoed faint, relentless, demon, demon, their voices threading through the wind, the snow, the dark. The figure's eyes glinted outside, yellow, wet, alive, watching through the crack, pinning her, its huffing a rhythm she couldn't escape, deep, guttural, endless. The shed wasn't safe, it was his. The walls creaked. The air reeked wet fur, rot, death, and she was his captive, trapped in a lair she couldn't flee. The cold deepened, the thudding louder crunch. Crunch, the figure's breath steaming hot, sour, flooding the shed, brushing her face, its eyes glinting brighter, cutting through her, into her. Kate's hands shook, the door rattled, the villagers' voices rising, victim, victim, their footsteps crunching closer, their hands clawing at the wood, praying, offering, hunting. The smell was unbearable, rotting, choking, sinking deeper, threading through her lungs, her panic, her soul. The night wasn't hers, it belonged to the thing, to the villagers, to the hunt, and she was its prey, trapped in a shed that reeked of death, a gaze she couldn't shake. Part 4. Kate's hands pressed against the shed's splintered door, her breath fogging and short. Panic bursts as the wood groaned under her weight, shaking, trembling, the thudding outside, relentless crunch, crunch circling tighter, shaking the snow. The smell flooded in wet fur, rot, death, gagging her, sinking into her lungs, her skin, her fear thicker now, alive, threading through her every gasp. The figures huffing pierced the dark, hot, sour, jagged, brushing the walls, the door, her neck, its yellow eyes glinting through the cracks, wet, unblinking, cutting through her, pinning her where she stood. The villagers' chant roared closer, louder, victim, victim, their footsteps crunching, crunch, crunch, their hands clawing at the shed, prying, pulling, offering her to the thing that hunted, the thing they feared. The shed creaked, the air too thick to swallow her, chest burning, her fingers numb, the huffing sharper, hungry, guttural, steaming through the gaps, brushing her face, hot, wet, endless. Kate's eyes stung, the smell choking her, rotting, alive, clinging to her jacket, her hair, her mind. The door rattled, splinters snapping, the villagers' voices a storm, demon, demon, their hands banging, their eyes glinting through the cracks, pale, hollow, like it's watching her, waiting for her. The figure loomed outside, its silhouette massive, hunched, its breath steaming thicker, hot, sour, flooding the shed, threading through her panic. Herself, she shoved back, her boots slipping, the floor slick with frost, with rot, the thudding louder crunch, crunch, the figure's steps shaking the walls, the ground, her bones. The villagers' chant surged, victim, victim, their hands tearing at the wood, nails scraping, prying the door open, cold air rushing in, the smell gagging her, wet, rancid, death sinking deeper. Kate's scream broke, no, sharp, desperate, but the wind swallowed it. The villagers' voices drowning it, demon, demon, their grip iron grabbing her, dragging her, her legs kicking, her hands clawing useless against their numbers, their fear, their faith. The door crashed open, snow swirled, the figure towered tall, hunched, its eyes glinting brighter, yellow, wet, alive, its huffing a rhythm that drilled into her skull, deep, guttural, endless, its breath steaming hot, wet, brushing her face, her neck, her fear. The villagers surged, lifting her, her body twisting, their hands cold, trembling, victim, victim, their faces blank, their eyes glinting, pushing her forward, toward the ridge, toward it. Kate's chest seized, her breath fogging, mixing with its steam, the smell alive, rotting, choking, threading through her lungs, her panic, her soul. The figure's eyes locked, watching, waiting, its thudding, shaking, the snow crunch, crunch closer, always closer. She broke free, stumbled, the snow dragging at her boots, the villagers lunging, demon, demon, their hands clawing, chasing her. Kate bolted up the ridge, her legs burning, the wind howling, the thudding behind, crunch, crunch, the huffing louder, hot, sour, grazing her ear. Ahead, the cave, the den she'd fled, its black maw gaping, she'd dove inside, slamming against the stone, the stench overwhelming, wet fur, rot, death gagging her, sinking into her. Bones crunch, snap, snap under her boots, the walls slick, trembling, the air thick with its presence, its smell, its breath. The villagers' footsteps crunched closer, their chant echoing, victim, victim, their shadows filling the entrance, gaunt, pale, watching her, offering her. Kate pressed against the wall, her chest heaving, the huffing sharper, hot, wet, brushing her neck, its eyes glinting yellow, alive, cutting through the dark, pinning her. The figure loomed inside now, its silhouette massive, its breath steaming hot, sour, flooding the cave, threading through her fear. The villagers crowded the entrance, their voices rising. Demon, demon, their hands trembling, praying, chanting, offering her to it, to him, to the thing they feared. The cave trembled, the thudding louder crunch, crunch, the figure's steps shaking the stone, its huffing, jagged, hungry, guttural, brushing her face hot, wet, its eyes glinting brighter, watching, waiting, its smell alive, rotting, choking, sinking deeper, threading through her lungs, her panic, herself. Kate's hands shook, the bones beneath her snapping, snap, snap, the sound echoing the villagers' chant, a roar, victim, victim, their eyes glinting like its yellow, hollow, staring through her, past her, to him. The figure stepped closer, its breath steaming hot, sour, grazing her neck, its eyes locked, cutting through her, into her. The night thickened, the cave a trap, the thudding, relentless crunch, crunch, the huffing, sharper, hot, wet, flooding the air, its smell gagging her, wet, rancid, death clinging to her throat, her mind, her soul. The villagers pressed in closer, their hands clawing. Demon, demon, their voices a storm, lifting her, dragging her toward it, its eyes glinting yellow, alive, its huffing a rhythm she couldn't escape, deep, guttural, endless. Kate's scream choked her chest, burning, the smell alive, rotting, choking, threading through her fear, her panic, herself. The figure towered, its breath steaming hot, wet, brushing her face, its eyes watching, waiting, claiming. The villagers' chant peaked, victim, victim, their hands trembling, pushing her forward, her boots slipping, the snow crunching, crunch, crunch, the figure's huffing louder, hot, sour, grazing her ear, its eyes glinting yellow, wet, cutting through her. Kate's legs buckled, the cave spinning, the smell unbearable, wet, rancid, sinking deeper, threading through her lungs, her panic, her soul. The figure's silhouette filled the cave, massive, hunched, its breath steaming hot, wet, flooding her, its eyes locked, watching, waiting, its thudding, shaking her bones, crunch, crunch, closer, always closer. The villagers stepped back, their chant fading. Demon, demon, their eyes glinting yellow, hollow, watching her, leaving her. Kate's chest seized, her breath fogging, mixing with its steam, the air too thick to breathe, the smell alive, rotting, choking, threading through her mind, her fear, herself. The figure loomed, its huffing, sharper, hot, wet, brushing her neck, its eyes glinting yellow, alive, cutting through her, its breath steaming hot, sour, claiming her. The cave wasn't a refuge, it was his lair, its walls slick, its air thick, its smell alive, wet fur, rot, death, and she was his prey, trapped in a den that reeked of him, a gaze she couldn't escape.